The sun was just rising when Grace stepped out of her small, one-room house. She tied her old black shoes, adjusted her faded brown uniform, and picked up her handbag. It was another workday. Grace was a waitress at a small roadside restaurant in the city. The job didn't pay much, but it helped her buy food and pay for her rent. She had no family, no support, and no one to call when life got too hard. She walked for 30 minutes every morning to reach the restaurant. Her feet often hurt, but she had no money for transport. Still, she smiled at people as she walked by. She believed in staying kind even when life wasn't kind to her. As she reached the main road, she passed a familiar sight, an old woman sitting on the sidewalk, holding a plastic bowl. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Her gray scarf covered messy hair. People passed her like she didn't exist. Grace looked at her for a few seconds. The woman didn't beg or talk. She just sat there quietly, her eyes sad and tired. Grace sighed and kept walking, but the image stayed in her mind all day. Every day, Grace passed by the same woman. She noticed the woman never asked anyone for money. She just sat there, morning till night, leaning on the wall. Her legs were always crossed, and her head was always low. Grace began to wonder who she was. Why was she there? Where did she sleep? Did she eat at all? One afternoon, while taking out the trash from the restaurant, Grace found some leftover bread and a bit of rice that a customer didn't finish. She packed them carefully into a small nylon bag. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. She put the food in her handbag and walked quickly to work. When she reached the corner, the woman was there as always. Grace walked over gently and knelt down beside her. "Good morning, Ma," she said softly. The old woman looked up, surprised. Her eyes were tired, but there was a hint of warmth in them. "I brought this for you," Grace said, handing her the food. The woman slowly took it, her hand shaking. She opened it and looked inside, then looked at Grace with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, my child," she said. "God bless you." Grace smiled, stood up, and walked to work. She felt peace in her heart. Days passed, and Grace couldn't stop thinking about the old woman. Every morning, she would wake up early, pack a little extra food, and take it to her. Sometimes it was a sandwich, other times just some rice or beans. Grace never asked for anything in return. She simply wanted to help. The woman always greeted her with a gentle smile and a soft, "Thank you, my child." Grace didn't need to hear anything else. The small gesture of kindness seemed to mean the world to the woman. Grace couldn't explain it, but every time she gave the food, her heart felt full. Even though she didn't have much, giving to someone who needed it seemed to make her own burdens a little lighter. Sometimes, when the woman would take the food, she would mutter a prayer. Grace didn't understand every word, but it was clear the woman had been through a lot. Still, she remained strong and calm, as if she had accepted life's harshness with dignity. One evening, after giving the old woman her daily portion, Grace sat on a nearby bench for a moment to rest. The woman looked up at her and spoke quietly, "You're a good soul. Not many would do what you do." Grace didn't know how to respond, so she simply smiled. Grace's routine continued. Each day, she would wake up, go to work, and stop by the corner to feed the old woman. She didn't mind the sacrifice. It became a small, meaningful part of her day. The woman, whom Grace had started calling Mama Ada in her mind, always accepted the food with quiet grace. Sometimes, they would exchange a few words, but Mama Ada mostly sat quietly, looking at the people passing by, deep in thought. Over time, Grace noticed that the woman looked a little healthier. Her skin wasn't as pale as it used to be, and she seemed stronger when she stood. Grace didn't know if the food was making a difference, but she hoped it was. One rainy day, when the streets were empty, Grace hurriedly walked to the corner with her food. She was worried that Mama Ada might not be there. But as she turned the corner, she saw the woman sitting in her usual spot, wrapped in a torn shawl. Grace rushed over. "Mama Ada, are you okay?" she asked. The old woman smiled softly. "I'm fine, my child. Just a little cold. But your kindness warms me." Grace handed her the food, and for the first time, Mama Ada reached out and touched Grace's hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Grace to know she had made a difference. One busy afternoon, Grace was clearing tables when the manager, Mr. Phillip, walked into the kitchen. He was tall, neat, and always wore a serious face. He watched as Grace packed leftover food into a small nylon bag. She didn't know he was behind her. "Grace," he said sharply. She jumped and turned around. "Yes, sir." "What are you doing with that food?" Grace swallowed. "It's leftover, sir. I was going to throw it away, but I usually give it to someone who needs it." Mr. Phillip narrowed his eyes. "This food is not yours to give away. If it's not served, it's waste. This is a business, not a charity." Grace tried to explain. "Sir, it's just a little. She's an old woman. She's hungry." "I don't care," he interrupted. "This is your first warning. If I catch you again, you may lose your job." Grace stood still. She needed the job badly. Her salary paid for rent, for food, for everything. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." But inside her heart, she was breaking. That evening, she walked home in silence. She didn't eat dinner. She didn't sleep well. She thought about the old woman, Mama Ada, and how she would be waiting, hungry and confused. The next morning, Grace stood at her small kitchen table, staring at her own breakfast, just 2 slices of bread and a boiled egg. She thought about Mr. Phillip's warning. She thought about her job. Then she thought about the woman at the corner and how nobody else cared about her. She picked up the bread, wrapped it in paper, and placed it gently in her bag. "If I lose my job," she whispered, "at least I did something right." When she reached the corner, Mama Ada was there. Her back was bent, and her hands were shaking. Grace knelt beside her and handed her the bread. Mama Ada looked at her and smiled, but this time, tears filled her eyes. "You're still here," she whispered, "even after everything." Grace smiled weakly. "I couldn't leave you hungry." The old woman touched her hand gently. "My daughter used to hold my hand like this when I was young," she said. "She died long ago." Grace blinked back tears. That day, Grace worked in silence, but her heart felt lighter. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew today she had shown love. The next morning, Grace rushed out of her house with a small piece of yam wrapped in foil. She hurried down the road, but when she reached the corner, the woman was gone. Grace looked left and right. She waited. She checked the nearby alley. Nothing. Maybe she went to find shelter, she said to herself. But the next day, and the next, and the next, Mama Ada didn't return. Grace began to worry deeply. She had no way to find her. No name, no phone number, no idea where she had come from. Her heart ached. She still brought food each day and left it where Mama Ada used to sit, hoping she would return. But the food remained untouched. One day, she sat on the ground where Mama Ada used to sit and cried quietly. She didn't even say goodbye. 2 days later, the restaurant was unusually quiet. Suddenly, a black car stopped in front of the restaurant. Everyone turned to look. A well-dressed man stepped out and opened the door for a woman. Grace dropped the tray in her hand. It was Mama Ada, but now she was different. She wore a clean white dress, her gray hair was neat under a gold scarf, and her face shone. Her wrinkles were still there, but her eyes looked alive. The restaurant owner, Mr. Phillip, rushed to the door. "Oh, Mrs. Ada Williams," he said, smiling like never before. Grace stood frozen. Mama Ada walked straight toward her and smiled. "Grace." Grace's lips trembled. "Mama, is it really you?" "Yes, my child," she said gently. "It's me." Mr. Phillip looked confused. "You know her?" Mama Ada nodded. "This young lady fed me every single day when I had nothing. She didn't know who I was. She didn't ask for anything. She only showed love." Mr. Phillip's eyes widened. "I was testing people," Mama Ada explained. "After my daughter died, I wanted to know if kindness still existed. So I dressed as a poor beggar and watched how people treated me." She looked at Grace and took her hands. Only one person saw me as human. Only one person shared what little she had. Grace began to cry. Everyone in the restaurant stayed in silence. Mr. Phillips stepped forward. "Ma, I didn't know." Mama Ada looked at him sharply. "You warned her not to help me. You almost fired her." Mr. Phillips dropped his head in shame. That same week, everything changed. Mama Ada offered to pay for Grace's education and training. She gave her a new apartment and helped her open a small food business. Grace couldn't believe it. From a poor waitress to a future business owner, Mama Ada would visit often. They sat together, shared meals, and spoke about life. They had become more than strangers. They had become family. As the months passed, Grace never forgot the lesson. Kindness doesn't need money, just a willing heart. And every time she saw someone in need, she remembered how one small act of love had changed her entire life.